Paula, thank you very much, and thanks to ARK for all of this work in pulling the paper together. My name is Dominic Bryan. I'm a professor of anthropology here, former chair of the co-chair of the Flags Commission, and one of the authors on this. I've got to do a little bit of stuff before I hand over to Duncan, who's going to introduce the first part of the paper. And then we're well aware of the expertise in this room, so we want to have a discussion and get plenty of feedback. I believe the closest working toilets are up at the Great Hall, so you go out the door and straight up the top of the quad, and they're on the left. And the fire exits, I think speak for themselves. But it's out that door. And I think under risk assessments we're supposed to do all of this thing, even when it is blindingly obvious. What we're going to do today, you're all very welcome, and thank you for your time. We're going to spend 20 minutes, half an hour on some presentations and talk about this model that we're trying to present and have a discussion over. And then I'm going to chair an open discussion on the floor, and we would like to get as much feedback as we can on the usefulness and utility of the model. Do you think it works? Do you think it's helpful? Do you think it's so blindingly obvious it's useless? All right, or do you think we actually need to structure some of these things? How can it be used? We want to have a discussion and get some feedback on that. So thanks again to ARK for setting this all up, and with that I'm going to hand over to Duncan, who's going to set this off.
Get rid of this thing as well. People will think something. Hello, Duncan Morrow, Ulster University. Feels like you're the very bad exam. I see you using your phones, you're in trouble. But I also see the tradition of everybody sitting at the back is well and alive. We'll see you all sneaking out. Good morning. As Don said, the risk of talking here is that there's a pretense that we know what we're talking about and you don't. Obviously this is a topic which everybody has to speak in and which everybody has a knowledge of, and the background for us, I don't know where you stand on this actually. Is it possible for me to, you know what I'm going to do, I'm definitely going to knock this over. That's 100%. Being extremely clumsy, but I'll try and stand here. So, how did this start? Well, I suppose all of us actually on this team, from Cooperation Ireland to the various academics who are on the team here, have been involved in the question of post-conflict issues in Northern Ireland and addressing some of the questions of legacy that have remained here. And it's no news to you to say that 30 years this month since the first ceasefires, we are actually at a point where it's a kind of a way stage again to look at how far have we got on this topic, because even the question of paramilitarism has been one of the most persistent and difficult questions to address, because clearly this is an aspect of society here which has been around for a long time, but which continues to have an effect on questions of safety, questions of law, but also questions of community development and how communities move forward, and can't be disconnected from politics. So our job, I suppose, has been kind of straddling at some level between the universities and outside the universities, and that has been, I suppose, what we've tried to bring to this table. That at some level we're probably jacks of all trades and masters of none. We're good academics and our good practitioners, but at some level we have talked to people in both ends and been part of discussions and activities in both ends. So I hope that that's the perspective it brings to it. The test, I suppose, of this is not a strict academic test. Does it work? Does it help us get forward to begin to create a model of what's going on? Our shared commitment, therefore, is in this dialogue between the universities and the outside world. Partly because we think the universities can offer a space where something which is at a premium in community life, i.e. time and space to reflect most people who are is here do have some chance of that compared to people who every day have to manage organisations, deal with emergency issues, and where the urgent always trumps the important. So hopefully, I think for us, the loss is, of course, as you know, the ivory tower analogy, where we're being so far away from things that we have nothing useful to say. On the other hand, I think sometimes it's precisely that distance which gives you the possibility, and hopefully that's what we'll do today. This is not about agreeing, this is about trying to draw together the different strands of our thinking in a quite simple way to say, how do we now understand the issue that we're being asked to deal with in so many ways? We've worked collectively with aspects of the tackling paramilitary programme in the Executive Office, really since it began, starting with the B4 communities in transition, but also on some of the prisons work in my own case, some of the youth work, some of the different aspects of that. So it's always been a theme for us about what does this look like, and as well as that, looking at issues like restorative justice and so on, and what might work forward. But as I say, the knowledge is in the room. Our shared commitment, I suppose, is the transition, and it's always been our position that we are trying to look towards a transition in line with the agreement, basically. Just so you know that we're not starting from a value-free proposition, that it's motivated by our commitment that disputes should be resolved by exclusive, peaceful and democratic means within the principles of human rights. And that has, if you ask where we're getting to and from, it's about that transition to that space and the difficulties of getting there. So, just my job today is really to set it up rather than to talk you through the model. Brendan will talk you through the model after I'm complete, but just some very obvious background points. The persistence of paramilitary and armed groups in Northern Ireland is a continuing practical problem, obviously, but it's also an analytical problem. In other words, we think that the practical consequences of this are continuously well publicised, and they come across in multiple different ways and in different aspects. But it is our contention that some of this is that we haven't really got to grips with what it is we're dealing with here, because it is a complex phenomenon. And also that we think that hopefully what we hope we're trying to do is encourage people to really think through, if we're problem solving around what an issue is, that we share some kind of analysis of what it is we're dealing with, and maybe that's the only step that we can contribute to at this point. The truth is that historically this is not new, and I think we need to take the eyes off to say it's a phenomenon of some communities that sometimes it has been a persistent and recurrent theme in our history, which has deep roots across communities, which is whether as self-defence or as taking action to take political projects forward. The tradition of armed groups is not even nothing to do with the last 30 years, but confined it goes hundreds of years. And that is a part of our culture. So, and the groups here are not distinct from their association with political struggle. So they associate themselves, and always have done, and that's their protected, with something bigger than themselves. In other words, something that involves everybody. So it's not a phenomenon on its own, it's a phenomenon within another phenomenon, which is an ongoing phenomenon, as you all know, with identity and nationality and possession and post-imperial life. The cultural and social reach of paramilitarism and armed groups, therefore, for us, extends beyond anything like, it's not an organisation in the simple sense with clear boundaries where people have membership cards and they move in and out. These may be obvious points, but the bottom line is that they extend into the very intimate elements of communities, into families, into traditions, into particular times in people's lives when they weren't in them and they are in them, into issues of gender and so on. And they are part of the way people tell their story, community history and organisation. And pretending that they're not, that there's something outside of that history and story, we don't think helps us begin the conversation properly. We have to, it's the dogs in the street kind of position that we're in here. And the precise boundaries of where groups or traditions begin and end varies by location, circumstance and tradition and time, actually. It extends when political events are on, or at one point, it changes in another area, leadership may be a critical issue. And the result of that is that this notion of identifiable members who can just be excluded, identified, and then the problem is over, isn't how it works. All of this always involves a question of culture change, of organisational change, and of behavioural change. And it's not the simple, nice answer that you can simply identify people and it stops. It's not going to, doesn't take us very far either. And on top of that, therefore, it's about both continuity and change. Since 1994, there's been enormous change, but there's also been at least nominally continuity around some of these traditions and in the way in which people still draw on that culture to talk about who they are. For one of the things that has decayed is a simple single meaning of the word paramilitary. It is used in off the tongue, on the nose show, in policy, in communities, in entirely different ways. So, for example, when we did work, we found no nationalist or Republican calling themselves paramilitary. That wasn't the word they used. So if it's tackling paramilitarism, it's just about loyalism. On the other hand, the state uses it to describe all organisations acting outside the law with political purpose. And the result of that is that it moves across in different ways. People are not actually talking about the same thing. So there's a real terminological problem now about that from the start of. The second one is that it is entirely takes you back now into a period of the pre-98 period. It's an organisation with a definitive time, or these are groups with a definitive, if like, high time, which was, or low time, whichever you prefer, 1998. And the result of that is that continues into the present. There's a kind of time transport in between activities which were understood in one way before the agreement and maybe just after and now. The PSNI data, on the other hand, talks about activities in communities which are effectively organised crime. They are effectively organised crime, and many people now have decided that is what paramilitaries are, essentially drug dealers and organised crime organisations, which are specifically nothing to and can be simply criminalised. And part of the problem is, at one level, there's lots of evidence of this happening, so it's not about saying it's not true, it's about why then is it not possible to deal with it simply as organised crime. And the IRC, its reports, notes that the historical context of these groups means we cannot completely disregard their past and treat them in an identical way to criminal gangs. So you're dealing with this very difficult problem, which is that they sit on a very difficult categorical boundary between organisations which have a real reality in communities and organisations which are at the same time on the other side of the law. So there's that kind of straddling that boundary, and it's sometimes difficult to tell and varies by locality, by leadership, by time, and all of these things. So you're dealing with I suppose the main point is dealing with, and this is what we're here to say, is a simple analysis of this mean we would come up with simple solutions, but the simple solutions may not actually work without some sense of the complexity of the phenomenon we're dealing with. So, obvious things, 2023 IRC, there are still locations in Northern Ireland where paramilitary groups have a visible and powerful presence. Yes, there you go. 18% of Northern Ireland people in Northern agree that paramilitary groups create fear and intimidation in their areas. That's a very high percentage of people. That is a fifth of people. And if you probably parse that for age and class, you would find a large proportion of that is, and gender possibly too, you would start to see that figure rising in certain categories quite markedly. 27% of people in Northern Ireland agreed in the Northern Ireland Life and Times survey that paramilitary groups contribute to crime and drug dealing in their area. So the association away from politics towards crime is growing. So that's a quarter of people assume that in their area is the key interesting part of it. In other words, their presence is in area rather than presences which are carrying out a war in other people's areas. That's another thing, the inward turning rather than outward turning, and that phenomenon. And the groups are embedded, was the term that the IRC used, in the sense that they are not dug in a simply separable way. There's the paramilitaries and not paramilitaries. There is communities in which paramilitaries operate in complex and different ways. None of that, I'm sure, is new, and this is just setting context. While the groups remain a clear and present threat, the intensity of that present and the imprint on community life varies enormously. This is the same point another way, which is that geography is a real issue. Depending on geography, you may think of them as non-existent, or you may think of them as all present, and everything in between. It may vary also by events. So significantly contentious issue can drive the presence of paramilitaries in one area or another. A leader who decides to work in certain areas can become a critical figure. So again, it varies. And also in terms of community, class obviously, but also the persistence of paramilitarism in loyalist communities in a way which is overt. Distance, obviously, which as armed groups still active in some ways in some parts of Republican nationalist territory, but differential experience of the political life since 1998 in two communities and the way that has operated. So that's also important to say. The scale of what we know about paramilitary armed groups is substantial, but that means that anybody who's trying to say they're like this on both sides, a two-sided approach. It may be true that armed groups are a two-sided story, but they're not the story in the same way. They're not a story in the same way. They are distinctive stories. And that means that they are connected, but not the same. And that is, again, a complexity. There's no point in us saying they're entirely separated, because the histories operate with reference to each other, absolutely with reference to each other. And the stories and narratives of why they're required operating with reference to each other, and yet there is, especially since 1998, probably very, very different trajectories in the ways in which the politics has worked out and the ways in which communities have responded to it. So and which means that a single programme like tackling paramilitarism doesn't land in the same way in different places. Doesn't land the same way. Doesn't land the same way in different communities, and it doesn't land in the same way in different geographies, and it doesn't land in the same way in different classes. And part of the issue in the class issue is tackling paramilitarism as a middle class programme for working class people. And that is another complexity. Changing and also the changing balances and the changing ways in which everything, academics would say that everything's interconnected. These are also things operating within wider ecosystems of politics, of social change, of economics, and so we can make a kind of a snapshot of now, but it may not be the same in 5 years or 10 years. And there may be an ongoing process of differentiation and decay happening between where paramilitaries are still present and armed groups are still present in areas where they're not. So that it's not a static picture. This isn't something where you can say, if we don't act now, it'll just stay the same. No, it may get different in different ways and vary in different ways with consequences for everybody. There are further issues, of course. Underreporting is a significant issue. How do we measure this? So from a measurement point of view in the academic game, it's very hard to measure this, because what an integrated organic organisation is in the community is not always reported, and wouldn't be reported, and wouldn't be expected to be reported. So a lot of this relies on people in communities telling you what it is, which I suppose is one of the backgrounds to this work for us, which is that the kind of work that we've been asked to do is usually when the communities and sit and chat with people, so as those outsiders being told things and trying to bring that into this world of academia rather than as critical knowledge. In other words, this is not knowledge which universities know by measuring things from the outside. This only works if you talk to people who actually live in areas and who understand how the things also connect with each other and vary. So that's part of that. Lack of trust in the state, again, that's endemic on working class communities, but it's super endemic in Northern Ireland. And it's a real issue when we come to this question of, which is, I suppose, at one level controversial, the things which organisations do in communities, simple transferring them to the state to organise them, is not a simple transition. It's not a simple transition, it's a complex transition. So you can say there are functions and elements, for example, low-level policing or high-level functions. Transferring that to the state is a significant question in terms of what the service is and how it's received. So that's an issue. Normalisation of harms. We have a society where actually things happen here which are treated as within the realm of the normal, which, if repeated elsewhere, are treated as absolutely so beyond the pale as you can't even think about it. So the shooting of young people, for example, or the capacity to undertake various closures of acts at various times of the year and so on, and close down communities. These are things which, if repeated anywhere, probably in most of mainland Europe and certainly in GB or Ireland, would be considered to be unacceptable. And here they're pretty much part of what is to be expected and the ritual of life. Hidden harms, the long-term consequences in health, the long-term consequences in community development, infrastructure and democratic development, the long-term consequences in terms of economic development, the long-term consequences in terms of culture of learning and so on. All of these things are really impossible to measure, but they're almost certainly additive in in other words, without making a special claim for here, you say Northern Ireland is the same as other working class communities, only more so. So this is the part of the only more so. Stifling impact of coercion. Coercion as a normative expectation. Again, not wanting to be naive, this isn't unique to Northern Ireland in any way, but the endemic nature of coercion and the risk of coercion and the expectation that that is something that you have to normalise is a long-term issue, which I don't think we've even lifted the lid on really, but it has an impact when it is normalised as a behavioural assumption that this is, anybody who does not understand that is not. In other words, it is rational to assume a coercive presence in the community. That once that becomes endemic in that way, that creates its own issues. And the data collection bias obviously is our issue. You know, we only we go to the right people, we go to the wrong people, we see what we see. And that's something which I think you need to test us always against, because people in communities are always better placed to say you're misunderstanding that wrong. But we need to be clear as well that that is an issue in policy. So this takes us to where we are. Understanding the issues, first step in problem solving. You know, actually, if you're solving the wrong problem, you're not going to solve it. So part of this job, what we're trying to do today, what is this? What is this? Can we stop assuming we know what it is? Suspend that for a second, and this is within the context of, as I said, the commitment to change. This isn't saying committed because it's morally neutral. If we are going to change this, we have to understand what it is in communities and for people and what it really is. There's a lack of precision about the nature of the issue, and this is the other bit. In other words, we think that this is a classic issue of a problem-solving approach. In other words, no single agency can solve this on their own. There is no, to use a very disastrous phrase in this context, magic bullet. There is, in one sense or other, the agencies are involved, but also communities involved, and it's a collaborative process, which actually, unless there is a meaningful dialogue within a shared set of values that can allow honesty. There's I'm speaking for myself here, there's a bias to dishonesty. In other words, it's not possible to talk honestly in public space about some of the ways in which, for example, public agencies have to relate to communities and engage with paramilitary groups on an everyday basis. Because if they were to do so, they'd be only known to show and told that that's wrong. On the other hand, if they do legitimise them and do make that possible, does that institutionalise things in a way which is catastrophic for the long run and gives people a value which they can't. And so the result of this is maybe academia is the only place where you can begin to have a bit of a dogs in the street conversation about this, which is, so how do we unpick that particular ball of wool? Which one am I on? This one? No. Is that the right one? So today's aims, and then it's over to Brendan, is really very simple, actually. Is to try to baseline a model which at least is an effort to reframe some of the discussion around paramilitarism, and with a practical purpose that if, first of all, to engage the discussion. So it's not that this is rightly you know, throw it out there and see what happens to it, and it comes back to you and it's recommends in a different space. Well, that's something we've learned from you, so that's not a problem. So we're happy to, in fact, encourage you to say, here's the shortcoming of this, or here's why this would be disastrous, or whatever, that's fine. But we want to use this model then to inform and encourage public debate and to shape policy designed to support transition, where all conflicts are resolved by purely democratic means and where communities flourish without armed groups. That's the goal as far as we're concerned, because I think the issue with transition for a lot of people has been transition not from what, but to what. And the question of what is it we're transitioning to, and allowing that in some sense to define what success looks like. How close are we getting to that, and in what way? Right, I'm going to hand over to Ben now.
Well, there's a space seat up here if you'd like to come and join us. Would you like to say? You sure you're okay? So, hey, everybody. My name is Brendan. I think I know the majority here, but for those of you who don't, I'm Global Research and Development Manager here at Queen's. And as Duncan and Dom alluded to today, we're going to present a model which isn't intended to narrow the debate or the discussion, but is intended to widen it. I think that's why it's so important to have you all today, and very grateful for you all attending. And we'll be obviously looking to get your thoughts on what we've produced. So what we've tried to do here is we've attempted to answer the question, what is paramilitarism in Northern Ireland? We recognise that each group acts in different ways and are shaped by community, location and leadership. Nonetheless, in our view, the range of behaviours can be understood as different combinations of three interconnected factors. These factors form the basis of our model. And these are our three intersecting factors that we've selected. We're conscious that this is subjective and people may suggest other things. There's a range of activities involved with paramilitary groups, armed groups, but it's our feeling that all that activity can be intersected into one of these three factors: legitimacy, utility and threat. We'll take you through each one independently, and then at the end I'll talk a little bit how we feel they come together in our model. So, issue legitimacy. Legitimacy of each group is established in the repeated tradition and cause evidence in the following: commemoration, flag and control of symbolic landscape, consultation with politicians, community representatives, statutory agencies, journalists and academics. Our second factor then is the issue of utility, which is the existence of a locally based bureaucracy with the devolved existence in local communities makes paramilitary groups a prominent and long-standing presence in many areas, evidence in the following: political leverage and advocacy, alternative justice methods including tackling antisocial behaviour, community leadership and linking social capital, social institutions including clubs, sports teams and community venues, illegal money lending and the supply of drugs. Our third category then is the issue of threat. Groups can maintain a degree of functional control of community activity and resource allocation in their area, evidence in the following: gatekeeping of community assets and resources, paramilitary style assaults and attacks, ongoing recruitment, child criminal exploitation, drug supply and manipulation of drug debt, intimidation, continued access to weapons, power to expel and control residency in some areas, and extortion of local businesses. So this is our attempt to project a model which includes these three things. On the left hand side you'll see threat, legitimacy and utility, balanced in equal measure. And what we'll do over the next couple of slides is take one away. It's our belief of how that changes the group. In our view, paramilitary groups exhibit aspects of all three characteristics, but crucially not always present equally. As I say, we'll take away each one now as we move through the next slides. So if we remove the category of utility, as shown in figure 2, paramilitary and armed groups can be characterised as organisations relying on coercive control by the credible threat of violence and legitimacy. When we remove the category of threat in figure 3, groups of this kind are close to being politically motivated community associations. We must therefore change the policy and interventions required to ensure transition in areas where these groups are active. Indeed, a group which is abandoned coercive control but is providing services while drawing on political legitimacy may be closer to being a community development agency. On the other hand, if we remove the concept of legitimacy from the model, as in figure 4, the associative group resembles an organised crime gang. The type of paramilitary or armed group is an active threat to areas where it is present. A group of this kind has also penetrated service delivery or service utility for criminal enterprise. So just some concluding remarks before we move into discussion. As I say, we obviously welcome any thoughts you have on that. But in conclusion, paramilitary groups are not a single entity, but a complex phenomenon which have emerged in Northern Ireland on the boundary of conflict, community resilience and criminality. By framing this within the context of the model, one can begin to grasp that tackling paramilitaries is a complex and challenging task. To make matters more complicated, each element in our model is not static. They are often influenced by socio-political changes. Even one element is reduced, it can return again to lesser or greater than before. Greater degrees than before. This model has significant practical implications, crucially addressing the continued existence of paramilitary groups as well as the harms they continue to perpetrate will depend on producing policy and action which addresses all three factors and proportions in which they exist. Withdrawing political legitimacy for armed action, addressing any resulting legitimate service deficit in communities arising from change, and eliminating the ability to use coercion to achieve goals. Now, I'm going to pass back to Dom now, who will take us through the discussion. If anyone has any comments, feel free. Thank you.
Right, I think we're going to turn off the videoing now so that I can make the presentation.